is made, and employee and compensation levels are maintained. So there are some, nuances to what the total amount that can be forgiven might be for your business. So this program opened up on April 3rd for small businesses and sole proprietors with employees, and on April 10th for independent contractors and self-employed individuals without employees. When the program opened on April 3rd, current SBA lenders were immediately able to accept and process PPP applications. And since April 3rd, many additional PPP lenders have been brought on board. Many credit unions and community banks that, perhaps historically haven't participated in our program, many of them signed up to be to participate in these in the PPP program. So as I mentioned, you were able to apply through SBA lenders, and there's a tool on our website to search for PPP lenders. Again, right now the appropriations have lapsed, so you cannot currently apply if you don't have an application in place. Generally, the types of businesses that could apply are any business that historically SBA would have considered small. Based on our size standards, which is, as it stood, most businesses. And the CARES Act expanded that to include not-for-profit organizations or any business up to 500 employees, specifically 501c3 organizations, 501c19 veterans organizations, and tribal concerns. There were also some exceptions for businesses in the hospitality NAICS Code 72 industries that had more than one physical location. They could make multiple applications. And of course, sole proprietors, independent contractors, and other self-employed people without employees very often may not have been eligible prior to the PPP program coming out. So when SBA, this is, I think, just good general information, when SBA is determining if a business is small, we don't just look at an individual entity. A single business owner may have 5 entities, okay? SBA must consider the total, number of employees, for example, if that's the appropriate standard, size standard for all affiliated entities. And affiliation can be due to common ownership, common management, things of that nature. And I give an example, a $5 billion company could own a small entity with 20 employees. They're not eligible, okay? That small entity. A couple other examples are franchises that have been registered with SBA, and faith-based concerns may also are not subject to the affiliation rules for this program. To apply for the PPP program, there was a very simplified process that required just the SBA application for the PPP program and the relevant documentation for you to calculate your payroll records. Okay, generally, they're looking at your 941, your 940 annual tax filing, for example, if you have employees. If you're a individual, for the owner's compensation, they're looking at the Schedule C for the net earnings, and that's all based on prior to 12 months or prior to February 15th, to 12 months prior to that, or 2019 calendar year information for those numbers.
Are you guys in classes?
So, other types of documents, aren't really relevant for the purposes of this program. Okay, we're not, SBA doesn't require that, you demonstrate credit elsewhere, or, personal financial statements, or things of that nature. You only have to provide the documentation that supports the payroll, as well as other expenses that you might be able to claim from the program, including the benefits associated with your payroll expenses, right? If you have retirement or health care that you pay to your employees, interest on mortgage obligations, rent, and utilities for anything prior to February 15th. So This is all, all the calculations for this program are pre-disaster, okay? They're dependent on the circumstances prior to the current disaster, okay? So whether you're talking about payroll costs or these other relevant expenses, that's the basis for the calculations. Additionally, if a business was approved and funded for an economic injury disaster loan prior to April 3rd, which is when the PPP went live, it is necessary to refinance those amounts, okay? The EIDL amount on the PPP loan, if the economic injury disaster loan included payroll as one of the uses of proceeds for the loan, okay? And the reason for that is it's not appropriate to have two loans for the same purposes with SBA. You can't have a PPP loan and an economic injury loan for the identical purposes. So again, that's if you used the EIDL loan for payroll expenses. You must use it to refinance. You must use PPP to refinance. Proceeds from any advance you may have received on the EIDL loan further will be deducted from the loan forgiveness amount on the PPP loan. So something else to keep in mind. Payroll costs can include salary, wages, commissions, tips, capped at $100,000 for any one employee. That is, the gross wages are capped at $100,000. The benefits, retirement, health, etc., would be in addition to that. Okay, so we're just talking about the gross wages. Employee benefits certainly are appropriate. State and local taxes are appropriate for the employer to add to the payroll calculation. And for the sole proprietor or independent contractor, they're looking at the wages, commissions, income, or net earnings from the self-employment. Again, capped at $100,000 on an annualized basis. Something important to note, though, is the business is benefiting from the Family First Coronavirus Response Act tax credit for qualified sick and family wages. Those would not be eligible for PPP costs because you're claiming a tax credit. Loans can be up for up to 2 months of your average monthly payroll times 25%, or 1 month times 2.5, subject to a $10 million cap. If you were a seasonal business or a new business, then we publish rules to clarify that. If you're a new business, you have to be able to demonstrate you're in operation prior to February 15th and have appropriate documentation. And you can use the period you were in business to apply. And for seasonal businesses, they must rely on the covered period of, which is February 15th to June 30th of 2019 to come up with the average for the monthly payroll for their PPP loan request, okay? I know we're getting a lot of questions on how the forgiveness process works. With the loan forgiveness, I guess you'd call it a performance period, begins the day of the loan disbursement, okay? And the 8 weeks immediately following the loans being dispersed is the relevant period for the forgiveness. Generally speaking, your actual, let me back up. Actual expenses are what are potentially forgivable for the PPP loan, okay? So from a documentation perspective, when you when the 8 weeks is up and you apply to your bank to process the forgiveness, it's the actual expenses, the documented payroll or mortgage interest or rent or utilities, depending on what you put into your loan application, are what are forgivable for the PPP loan. With the PPP, no more than 25% of the forgiven amount may be for non-payroll costs. So whatever the total expenses are, the amount that is forgivable can be no less than 75% for payroll, okay? So that's the important takeaway, right? If you don't maintain your staff and payroll, there's going to be money left over, okay? That money won't be forgivable because you didn't spend it. And so I've kind of tried to explain it as easily as I can. So clearly, if you aren't able to, if you reduce your full-time employee, your FTE headcount, or if you've laid folks off and you're unable to hire them back, the total amount that would be forgivable is going to be reduced because your total expenses are going to be lower. Okay. And then keeping in mind that 75% must be payroll, that could, any of the non-payroll expenses, you may not be able to have all of them forgiven. Okay. So that's additional guidance and clarity on the forgiveness process is still to come, but that's kind of the takeaway for forgiveness. So again, the forgiveness is going to be processed by the lender that you applied for, and you'll be required to provide documentation to substantiate those expenses. If you have any additional amounts left over that isn't forgiven, it converts to a normal loan. Okay. Well, it starts off as a loan, to be perfectly accurate. Right. It is a PPP loan, and the term is 2 years at 1% fixed rate. Okay. All payments will be automatically deferred for 6 months, but interest will continue to accrue during the deferment period. If you have funds left over remaining at the end of the forgiveness period that you don't need or don't want to continue to use, you can certainly pay off the balance with the remaining funds, plus the 1% interest amount, okay? Or allow it to term out. So the loan would re-amortize for any unforgivable funds over the 18 months of payments remaining. So that's generally how it would work. There are no prepayment penalties or fees, in other words, okay, for any of the unforgivable loan amounts you may owe. Should point out no collateral is required, nor is any personal guarantee required, okay? Though clearly if the proceeds aren't used as they were intended or for fraudulent purposes or fraudulently obtained, then the U.S. government can pursue criminal charges against you. So I think I'll go ahead and go through the economic injury and the debt relief before we open it up for questions, since we're going through it fairly quickly here, because I see a lot of questions in the comments. I promise I'll get to them. So the economic injury disaster loan, EIDL or EIDL, which is we refer to it in short, and Advance. Again, we are no longer accepting applications for the EIDL program at this point due to lapse in appropriations. But when as I said in the beginning, I may have said, applications are continuing to process, okay? Generally speaking, the economic injury loan is to provide you with working capital so that you can pay your operating expenses, okay, that you are unable to meet as a result of the COVID-19 disaster, okay? Similar to the PPP, but not identical, is that the program is designed for businesses with up to that are considered small or up to 500 employees, as expanded by the CARES Act, or not-for-profit organizations. Businesses in certain industries, you may have more than 500 employees if you meet your size or size standards, and the not-for-profit organizations are not subject to the 500 employee cap. Further, businesses may have more than one EIDL application. If they have multiple locations, for example, with separate financials, each entity may apply for PPP, for an economic injury disaster loan. That's as to be distinguished from the PPP, where it's one loan per applicant, okay? The Advance was instituted as part of the CARES Act, and businesses are eligible for up to $10,000 based on the number of employees to ensure that the greatest number of applicants receive assistance via the Advance. The amount of the Advance was determined or will be determined by your number of pre-disaster employees as of January 31st. So that was in the application itself. It asks you what your January 31st employee count was, and you would be eligible for 1,000 per employee. If you don't have employees, if you're a sole proprietor, you probably would have entered 0. The application assumes that you count as 1 employee as the proprietor. So you'd be eligible for up to 1,000. So a little bit more on, eligibility here. Sole proprietors are eligible, with or without employees. Independent contractors are eligible. Those sorts of cooperatives, employee-owned entities, those sorts of things are all are eligible, including agricultural co-ops. And as I mentioned, private nonprofit organizations without limit to the size of how many employees they have. Certain types of entities are ineligible for EIDL, as to be distinguished from the PPP. And the main one I like to draw attention to is that agricultural enterprises, farms, are not eligible for the EIDL loan. They may tap into the U.S. Department of Agriculture programs at the Farm Service Agency, for example, but they are eligible for PPP. So I bring this up because these are different programs, and they are kind of the underlying authorization for them is it's different law, different parts of the law authorize them. So that's why there's some differences. For the loan part of the economic injury disaster loan, the terms for COVID-19 loans are 30-year terms at 3.75% fixed rate. Payments will be deferred automatically for 12 months for all economic injury disaster loans, and up to $2 million may be borrowed to cover operating expenses. The operating expenses, very specifically, are going to be, what would be typical working capital, uses of proceeds for a loan. Meaning, it's more, I guess it's easier to think about what you can't use an EIDL loan for, and that is refinancing existing debts, purchasing equipment, improving or buying real estate. It's meant to pay your operating expenses. So, certainly payroll, accounts payable, replenishing inventory, those things you need to keep, your business running, okay? And finally, is the SBA's debt relief that was authorized by the CARES Act. And this is for, I guess you think of them as normal SBA loans, 7A, 504, microloans, any existing 7A, 504 microloan, SBA will automatically pay the principal, interest, and fees for a period of 6 months. Okay, so that started on March 27th when the CARES Act was passed, and will continue to September 27th. SBA will also automatically pay the principal, interest, and fees for any new normal 7A, 504, and microloans that you may apply for and receive between now and September 27th. And that's that's automatic. Okay, every single current or future borrower, as this slide indicates, is eligible for that debt payment relief by SBA. I know many borrowers may have asked for deferments on their SBA loans, and many of the banks process those deferments. If you're in deferment, there's no loan payment to make, okay? So if you would prefer to benefit from the debt relief payments, you need to ask your bank to take your loan off of deferment so that SBA can make those payments for you, okay? So that's something to keep in mind. So, couple other things before we launch into the questions. I want to show everybody where to get up-to-date information about PPP and EIDL and these programs. And just bear with me for a second, and I'll pull up this, share a different screen here. And you should be able to see the webpage, and is our website at sba.gov/PPP. You can navigate this from the main SBA.gov website, but this is where our coronavirus relief funding options, where we store that information, okay? So starting with, on the left, you can see the list of the coronavirus relief options, and we'll touch on the SBA Express Bridge loans in a moment. But this is where, you'll see right here, notice lapse in appropriations. So when if Congress chooses to refund the program, this is going to be where we will be posting it, in addition to, our office, communicating that through, our partners like talking to the chamber and other methods. So as it says here, we're currently unable to accept new applications. So there's a lot of good information about the Paycheck Protection Program here, the interim final rules, frequently asked questions, a lot of helpful information on this page, okay? There's a copy of the borrower application form, and then a bunch of, specific guidance that we put to our lenders. So everything we're telling our lenders about the program in terms of how to do it, it's right here on our website, okay? So you can see exactly what we're telling them and how they're managing the program, okay? Another good tool, and it's frequently updated, is the Treasury's website. And if you go to treasury.gov, you can see that there's a little red bar right here about clicking here for, paycheck protection loans. That takes you to this page. That's a lot of, PDFs and rules and frequently asked questions that can be helpful. Many of these are being updated almost every day, particularly the frequently asked questions on the Treasury's website, okay? All right, back to Paycheck Protection Program. So you can either use the navigation over here. You can also click through bottom of the page. It takes you to the economic injury, disaster loan, where again, we have yes.
Sorry to cut you off, buddy. Everything that you said for, I would say, maybe the last 60 to 90 seconds, your mic was super staticky and it was all jumbled. So we missed pretty much everything you said for the last 90 seconds.
All right. Can you hear me now?
We can. Now you're coming in super clear. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. Sure thing. So I'm not going to go back because maybe it was playing with the internet is what slowed down Zoom. We're on Zoom, right? I was talking about up-to-date information, the Paycheck Protection Program, SBA.gov/PPP. That is going to be, along with the Treasury Department's website on PPP, the only source of accurate information about the PPP programs, economic injury, et cetera, any of our small business relief efforts, okay? I do get a lot of questions about, my banker said this, my, accountant said that. I can't speak to other parties' interpretations about any of these things. We have to rely on the published guidance that are on these two websites, okay? So typically, and as we go through and answer questions, I'm going to be referring to, interim final rule on eligibility criteria and requirements for certain pledges of loans, for example. This is literally the document I'm talking about, okay? Frequently asked questions. A lot of those answers are on these documents. So that's what we, must actually speak to when we give guidance on any of these programs. So just showing folks where this information is, so that you can take a look at it yourself too. That includes the lender's guidance, right? So when we're updating our guidance for the lenders, that's also showing up on the Paycheck Protection Program page. So see here, last appropriations, we can't accept new applications at this time. I know a lot of people, over 3 million actually, applicants applied for the EIDL program. SBA is still, working through those applications that are in process, and they are being processed on a first come, first served basis. So the disaster loans opened up on March 19th. I know it's just a month ago. It seems like it was many months ago, I know. The streamlined portal that included the enhancements from the CARES Act went live on March 29th. I know folks have called to try and get an update on their status if they haven't heard anything. And if you haven't heard anything, it's because your application hasn't been processed yet, okay? If you have a confirmation number that starts with a 3, that indicates that you have the most current application from the Streamline portal that launched on March 29th. Anybody that applied before that was instructed via email to go back into the new portal to take advantage of the new certifications that the CARES Act included, including the advance, okay? And those individuals, the new confirmation number is their confirmation number, but it's tied to their original application. You know, if they made an application on March 19th, that's the timestamp that we're talking about when we're talking about first come, first served. And we are aware of folks that got their applications in early on that have, for whom the advance funds have been dispersed and loans are starting to close. Okay. There's no way to really tell. We don't have a mechanism for identifying where a particular application is in the queue. The way it's working is when your application is processed, that's when the advance posts to your account without notification, kind of how the IRS tax payments went out without specific individual notification. And then it seems like not too long after that is when they're getting information about their EIDL loan approved amounts. And then they'll get instructions and documentation for that. We are aware of a lot of, well, scammers out there right now that are, spamming, the entire business world in America, purporting to or impersonating them as SBA, as legitimate SBA emails, talking about processing their grants and things of that nature. And, fill out this document here and, you'll get your loan or your grant. Those are not accurate. Okay. First of all, SBA doesn't do grants. Okay. We're processing advances and we're not going to, ask for unsolicited information. If you completed your EIDL application, have that confirmation number starting with a 3, we don't need more documentation from you to process your advance. Okay. For loans up to $200,000, we also don't need additional documentation to process those EIDL loans. And that describes 95% of the applications. When you receive your loan approval, it'll clearly indicate your confirmation number, and it'll redirect you to sign back in and create an account at the COVID-19 relief.sba.gov site that the EIDL application portal resides on to continue your application and close the loan, okay? In no circumstances will SBA be sending attachments asking for you to sign or return or remit via email or fax or anything of that nature at this point for the EIDL program. Additionally, I should mention, and I think it's clear that the PPP loan is processed by the bank. SBA is not going to communicate with any individual borrower regarding your PPP loan application. Period. The banks process the PPP loans. Okay, so that's something else to keep in mind. Finally, I do want to touch on one more program that is called the SBA Express Bridge Loan Program. This is a pilot program that is available to existing SBA Express lenders. Okay, so this is a lender that participated in our normal SBA Express loan program prior to the disaster. And for businesses that have an existing relationship with that lender, they may apply for this program if their lender participates. Okay. All SBA Express lenders may participate in the Express Bridge Loan Pilot Program. There is no list because they may or may not participate in the pilot if they don't choose to. So the best advice I can give is to call your existing bank or banks, because again, you must have a current business relationship with an SBA Express lender, and ask them first, do they participate in SBA Express? And if so, are they participating in the bridge loan pilot program? And if the answer is yes, then the business can apply for $25,000 to provide short-term working capital pending the processing of your economic injury disaster loan. So while you're waiting for the decision and disbursement of your economic injury disaster loan, you can take advantage of this program particularly, okay? And it is one of the few types of loans that you can refinance. In fact, in this case, you must refinance the proceeds of with the EIDL loan. So again, the best thing to do is call your bank and see if they participate, okay? And they know if they participate in the express program or not, okay? If you don't have a bank, if your bank doesn't have that relationship, then unfortunately this may not be an option for you, okay? And we talked about SBA debt relief. So I think it's kind of a good opportunity to go through some of the questions that were sent in advance, and we'll try and kind of churn through the chat questions here.
Yeah, you know what, Dan, I can help with this.
Okay.
Facilitate it to make things a little more smooth. I know you also have some of the questions that were submitted to me via email from some of the membership as well, correct?
Yes, I've got them too.
So let's do we can do it three ways. Well, we can do it this way. I will read a question from the chat, and then you can read one of your questions, and then I'll take a question from the Q&A box, and then we'll just kind of rotate around. Does that work for you?
Yeah, it works for me, man.
Perfect. All right, so I will start us off in the chat. One of the first questions that came in was from Todd Mallinson. What position is SBA taking on existing commercial loans who have insured through a partner lender?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Yeah. So if he's referencing the debt relief, if he's referencing the debt relief, it only is with respect to SBA loans. So any other commercial loans that SBA is not affiliated with would not apply for this debt relief. So I guess we have no position.
Okay. Todd, actually, I'm gonna open that up to Todd. Todd, did we address your question the way that you had wanted?
Hey, David, to clarify, I'm talking about an existing SBA-backed loan that I have with my lending institution.
Yeah, so if it's an existing SBA loan, as I said, this is something that is offered to all SBA borrowers for all current SBA loans. Now, I should probably mention that if your loan is, in liquidation or, some other circumstance, where normal payments aren't being made, then that would be a different circumstance. Okay, so if we're gonna get a little bit in the weeds, but otherwise, this is something you can benefit from right now. The banks got the final rules on how they need to process this last night, actually, and it is retroactive to March 27th. If you've made payments since then, the bank has instructions on how to process that. Bottom line is, SBA is making those payments. So, you can go ahead and cancel your auto pay, for example, if you have auto pay for the next 6 months, assuming that your loan is in normal repayment. So it's not something you have to opt into. In other words, it is something that is automatic that SBA will be doing.
Awesome. All right, you are up next, Dan, for one of the online submissions.
Here we go. So I've been approved for my SBA lender, but my bank is telling me they're waiting to see what the next steps are from SBA. I've yet to see closing documents or money deposited in my account. So at SBA, via the interim final rules and the FAQs that we post on our website, is giving the banks everything that they are required by the law and the interim final rule, everything they need to process the loan. Okay, and many banks are doing so. Okay, so I can't speak to any specific additional guidance that the bank is waiting for or not. SBA's position is we have, given them everything they need, and that the rule is clear, and many banks are rolling with that.
Excellent. All right, here's a question from the Q&A box. For restaurants, it is difficult to hire staff back to normal levels as the state mandates to go only. Will this be taken into consideration with forgiveness of the PPP?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think, and naturally there's a lot of questions around what if I don't, or what if I can't hire all my people back, or something to that effect. Bottom line is, your actual expenses will be forgiven for payroll. Okay. Depending on the FTE count, what might be forgivable for the non-payroll piece may be reduced, because 75% of those expenses must be for payroll. So I think when we, publish the official calculator, some of that will be, make a little bit more sense, but you're not going to be penalized for hiring employees under this program. Those expenses that you wouldn't have occurred otherwise for payroll will be paid if you pay those employees. Okay. I guess more guidance to come when it comes to those non-payroll expenses, but the primary purpose of this program is to protect paychecks. Okay. I think it's pretty clear that was Congress's intent. It's what they named the program. Okay. And it's very clearly, the emphasis is on giving businesses the ability to keep folks on the payroll or rehire. If you cannot do that, that's fine. You will be reimbursed, or those payroll expenses will be forgiven no matter what. My turn.
All right, so this next one, I wish I could do this for all of these, but I am going to try to combine some of these when it permits on what I'm seeing on my screen. So I'm going to combine these three questions into one from Elaine, Douglas, and another one from Todd. Elaine starts off with, we applied on the day after the program opened and were told by our bank that we are now in SBA's queue for approval for the loan, but the money has since run out. Is there a chance we can still get our loan? And then in conjunction with that, Douglas asks, are funds available for previously submitted and or in process EIDL loan applications? And then Todd will round it out by asking, what is the turnaround time in terms of responses for EIDL applications?
Okay, so with PPP, okay, if there is no queue, okay, I think that that some of that is getting misinterpreted. The PPP program is processed under what we call a delegated lending authority. So the bank approves the loan, okay, based on after getting all the documentation from you filling out the borrower application, the bank doing the paperwork on their side, the bank is approving the loan. Then the bank enters the relevant information into our system simply to obtain a SBA loan number, okay? And that process is essentially instant. Like once they input the information and hit submit, they have an SBA loan number, okay? So there is no queue, in other words, on SBA's end for PPP loans, okay? The bank then, based on guidance we've published, has 10 calendar days to close and disperse that PPP loan once they've received the SBA loan number. And I noticed there's many questions along that in that vein, in terms of where an individual borrower's PPP loan is in the bank's process. We have no visibility into that. We can't. 1.7 million loans were approved and issued loan numbers for prior to the funds running out yesterday morning. So we don't have the ability to specifically confirm whether or not an individual applicant got an SBA approval or not. You have to go to your bank to ask them very specifically, what is the status of my loan? If their response is that it's in the SBA queue, all I can say is that that's not accurate. And you probably should ask some more questions about the status of your loan to identify if it has been submitted to SBA or not. If your loan has not been submitted to SBA, there is no ability to do so at this point. Okay, until Congress chooses to appropriate new funds, the bank cannot enter any loan information into our system. So I truly mean there is no queue at any stage with respect, to getting the loan to SBA. Some banks are still accepting PPP applications, potentially pending potential additional funds for PPP. I can't give guidance on that. Some banks are not. Bottom line is, at this point, they cannot submit those loans to us after the fact, now that appropriations have lapsed. With respect to EIDL and funding, my understanding is that those applications are continuing to fund. The advances are continuing to fund. At some point, those funds will be fully dispersed, and the processing will stop. That hasn't happened yet. Once I have information, more information about that, that's something I'll be able to communicate more broadly. Certainly our administrator of SBA and Secretary Mnuchin have urged Congress to appropriate more funds for both programs. Clearly, the demand outstripped the appropriated amounts. And that's kind of where it's at right now, pending additional congressional action. With respect to turnaround times for EIDL, it depends on where the application queue. I mean, there were over 3 million applications, so conventional turnaround times probably don't apply. It does appear that for the loans, it's still taking about 3-ish weeks, give or take, for some of the approvals that I'm just personally aware of, because businesses have made us aware that they got their approval. And as I shared during the presentation, the advances are being posted prior to that approval coming out. So I think that's all I can really say about the turnaround time subject.
All right, good job tackling all three of those, Dan. You nailed it. All right, the next question, and then I'm gonna turn it over to you for yours, is from Ms. Betsy Park. If we receive an EIDL in a small amount and use it to pay rent and then receive a PPP, can we use that for rent for another period?
So that's a great question, and the best answer I can give is accounting for your expenses is important, right? And using the proceeds for the intended purpose is necessary. So, the timing is also probably relevant depending on if you apply for PPP versus EIDL. When you apply for the PPP loan, you say that you make an assertion that you're not going to duplicate the use of proceeds. So, it really does depend on, good record keeping for the borrower, that you're not duplicating those uses of proceeds at the same time. It's, more than likely, the PPP will fund first if you got your PPP application in. So it's less of an issue. You can allocate those funds accordingly. But it is important to keep good records for the use of proceeds of both of these loans programs, because they are specific in terms of how you're supposed to use them. So it's my turn here. Must I use the 75% of PPP loan designated for payroll before June 30th to be eligible for forgiveness? The answer is it depends. No, it's not necessary. It depends on when you received your funds. So, as I indicated, the performance period is 8 weeks. That's when your clock starts for using the funds as requested and for forgiveness. we're on April 17th right now. So, anybody that gets a disperse a loan between, I guess, as late as the 27th, you're necessarily, you'll have to have, your 8-week period is going to be in that window, right? This program is open to apply for by June 30th, appropriations depending on appropriations. So the takeaway here is, when we're doing the calculation, it's pre-February 15th for the pre-disaster. And then all the other subsequent calculations are based on the 8 weeks after you get the money, period.
Okay. A good follow-up question to that, and I'm gonna jump ahead just to sneak this one in, is from Alan. And he asks, can you turn in the extra if you do not use it?
Yeah, so good question. So if you didn't use the funds, they're not forgivable, right? Because it's only your actual expenses that are forgivable, right? And you're going to have an amount that is going to be, it's still a loan. You can pay that. It's not that you're turning it in, it's that you're paying the loan off, right? With the remaining funds. And since there's no prepayment penalties, it's something you absolutely can do.
Awesome. Okay, here's a good question, anonymous attendee. Our bank loan officer would not include my salary draw in the total loan amount. They are a single owner LLC with employees. Despite the program description, is there an opportunity to appeal this with SBA when and if our application reaches you?
So we did publish clear guidance. The initial interim final rule said net earnings. So draw is not included in net earnings. Draw is simply a check that you take from your account, right? We're looking at essentially your Schedule C to determine what your net earnings are for the purposes of this program. And then the follow-up interim final rule that we published, when did we publish that one? I don't know when we published that one. The days are blending, right? We did publish additional guidance not too long ago that provided that additional instructions for the sole proprietor portion, right? Your income as an owner of your business, which is a legitimate expense for calculating both the loan request for PPP and the forgivable amount. And it was very much revolving around the Schedule C and the net earnings, okay? A draw in and of itself is insufficient to provide documentation of what your net earnings are. You have to have something more substantive to that, and then our rules determine that it is the Schedule C.
Cool. I think you may have touched on this, Dan, but if you haven't, this is a good question. If you have, we can move on to another one. If PPP interest accrues from day one, is that still payable if all funds are used per the guidelines?
So that's a good question. I think what's going to come to, into our the calculations for the 8-week forgivable period. I don't know the answer to that. I think that's the question is, over the forgivable period, will the interest that accrues be forgivable? I hate to speculate. I'm not supposed to speculate. I expect that, the forgivable expenses, the interest on those forgivable expenses should also be forgivable. I don't know that for sure yet, though. That would be consistent, but that's still going to be subject to the forgiveness rules that we publish. Kind of answers it, I think.
Sweet. All right, you're up.
Okay. There's some questions about like the period under which the forgivable expenses apply, right? I think we kind of addressed that, but there's no look back, okay, for, any payroll that you incurred prior to getting the loans dispersed, okay? That period is only on from when the loan is dispersed, may those expenses be forgiven, okay? I do want to make that perfectly clear. There's a good question here about guidance for folks to keep records for the loan forgiveness. That's a great question. I think, a good best practice from an accounting perspective is when you have targeted funds, if you will, that it's probably wisest to, open up a separate checking account for those targeted funds so that you can very easily keep track of the disbursements. And that makes the math a lot easier and the reconciling a lot easier when you, for PPP, for example, when you're applying for the forgiveness, because the amounts will reconcile, right? The total amount dispersed out of the account will reconcile to any relevant payroll records you might have, for example. So that's what I would suggest as a pretty common best practice, and from my prior life as somebody that worked in accounting related things. So that's probably the best way to do it, and for the purposes of particularly the PPP, since it's forgivable, that you keep track of it in that fashion. Your turn, Dave.
Sorry, I was replying to some other messages. This one should be quick, so I'm gonna sneak in 2 on this. Are telephone and internet services defined as utilities for the PPP up to 25% non-payroll expenses?
So that's a great question. So when we're talking about utilities, okay, we're talking about things that would be considered operating expenses on your Schedule C, okay? That is what is considered an eligible utility expense. So that's what we should be looking at. So I know there may be some self-employed individuals or 1099 contractors that that are using their own personal their home expenses. The rules as we've issued them would I think fairly clearly indicate that it wouldn't apply in that circumstance unless you're filing a Schedule C. Okay, and that is showing up on the Schedule C as an operating expense.
This next one, actually, let me kind of proof them and see if I can combine them. Yes, I'm going to combine these 2 questions. I'll read the shorter one first and then the longer one second, okay? The first one is from Sarah, and she says, if after the 8 weeks, we still cannot maintain our workforce, are there penalties for reducing workforce at that point? So just put a pin in that for now, Dan, because a kind of continuation is from Rachel Hogenkamp. Similar to the question around restaurants, we are a health spa and 90% of our workforce has been furloughed. I just want to be clear. We have 3 managers still working, including myself as the owner. We are an LLC, and assuming we receive funding, which is unclear through the PPP, did you just say that the amount we pay out for payroll will be forgiven during the 8-week period? We don't think we can hire folks back because we don't know when our doors will reopen, and there's simply no money coming in for us. It's all just about assisting the current payroll for the 3 of us now. So those 2 things were kind of connected.
Yeah, so I kind of come back to your actual payroll expenses are what are forgivable, right? And so long as those payroll expenses are consistent with your prior year, like what you allocated, they will be forgivable. The amount that is not forgivable, or may not be forgivable, I should say, is can be influenced by not having 100% head count, right? And in particular, that will influence the amount that is available for the non-payroll expenses that are authorized under PPP. Okay, those calculations become clear, but the payroll piece will be forgivable. So I can't, I guess I can't speculate on, how much of the rent or interest or, utilities will ultimately be forgiven as part of the program, right? But I can say that all of your payroll will be forgiven. or forgivable, assuming that, you know, it's consistent with what you applied for, because it is about protecting the paychecks, right? That's what the program is designed to do. So I guess, you know, as you're planning your cash flow for the next 8 weeks, once you receive PPP funding, right? You know, it's kind of important then to, you probably have a sense of what your payroll levels are going to be, what your ability to rehire is going to be, right? So you can kind of calculate, you know, how much is going to be available to cover, you know, the non-payroll piece, right? Because again, 75% of it must go to payroll. So, you know, I wish I could give a, you know, more concrete answer, but because everybody's circumstances are going to be different, all I can, you know, kind of keep coming back to is, you know, those actual payroll expenses should be forgivable. So.
I'm gonna sneak this one in before you go, Dan, because it's kind of connected to this. It's kind of a follow-up. Yeah. If the 8-week period expires prior to June 30th, 2020, does the business have until June 30th, 2020 to ramp up the FTEs?
So if your 8-week period, if your 8 weeks ends before June 30th, I think is the question.
Yeah.
No, the performance period is the 8 weeks immediately after you receive the funds.
Got it. Okay.
It further, like I said, like if you don't get funded and your 8 weeks extends beyond June 30, your 8 weeks is from when your funds are dispersed. Okay. It's just that June 30, you can't apply past that. So some questions in here about, you know, some different types of, it looks like real estate agents and some different types of self-employed individuals, and, you know, how things work. And some of these are pretty specific about, you know, if a closing takes place in April that began in January, can I still apply for PPP or PUA? Is that unemployment, I think, or EIDL? So I can't advise on, I cannot advise on unemployment. I can say that with respect to PPP, you are asserting with PPP that you need this loan to pay yourself and your employees. When you apply for unemployment, you're saying that you're not getting paid by your employer. Both of those statements cannot be true at the same time. Right? I think that's all I can say on that subject. So I think it's important, you know, if you're in that position where you can choose, you know, what is more appropriate or what is more beneficial for you, then you have to kind of make that analysis yourself. Ultimately, it's about actual expenses though, right? We're still going to come back to, with respect to PPP, we're looking at, and there was a couple questions in here about, you know, the busy season, right? Well, my busy season is this period, my busy season is that period. When we're talking about payroll, you can rely on the seasonal period that is equivalent from last year, 2019. And that period that we put in the rules says, in the FAQs that have been published, is you have to base it on February 15th to June 30th, right? That's the seasonal period that you must use for your calculations for payroll, right? If the 12 months just doesn't make sense for your business. With respect to proprietors, the sole proprietor income, non-wage income, as in their net earnings, their net profit for the business, they can only rely on the Schedule C divided by 12 months. Okay, the interim final rule kind of clarified that, that, you know, if your net earnings for the entire year were X for your business, whether it's seasonal or not, your calculation must be divided over the 12 months to come up with a nominal average income. Okay, and then based on that, you can, you know, remit payments to yourself over the PPP 8-week period that correspond to that, right? So you know, that's kind of, that's what you have to base your loan calculation on. And when you're talking about, you know, the paying yourself, I'm saying in air quotes, as the proprietor, out of those PPP funds, right? You can only pay yourself that amount that you asked for. Okay. And for it to be forgiven, I should say, right? Any additional funds that you may get, you know, I guess that wouldn't be necessarily relevant for the purpose of, you know, calculating your forgiveness. Let's see if there's anything. Do closing or contracts constitute work? Closing would be work. I think that's talking about unemployment. I can't really speak to unemployment rules. Dave, you want to pull up another question?
Yeah, I've got a bunch. I thought you were going to pull another one on your end.
Yeah, no, I'm scanning through like for a good one. I should have.
Yeah, no. I got a bunch of good ones. I'm actually going to find one that Jennifer had asked, and this may be more of a directive. You may have already covered this in the presentation earlier. So, and we will be making this webinar available on the Chamber website. Hopefully we'll get it up today, but if not by this afternoon, it'll definitely be up on the Chamber's website by Monday. It seems very difficult to log in and check application status on the SBA website. It would be helpful if you could provide us with links, instructions of how to do that. And then a continuation question from the Q&A box is, when is documentation, like this is an example, when is documentation due for proof of PPP expenses?
So with respect to the EIDL program, there is no mechanism to log in and check the status of your loan unless your loan has already been approved. Okay, that ability doesn't exist until you have an approval in place. And part of the approval is, you know, you're able to create an account so you can close a loan and look at the documents. You haven't received an approval, there's no way to log in. That was available under the old system. That system is does not apply to the COVID-19 EIDL. Sorry, say again, what was the PPP question?
It is, when is the documentation due for proof of PPP expenses?
So when you, it's when you apply for forgiveness. So at the end of the 8-week period is when you're eligible to apply for forgiveness to your lender, and that's where you'll provide them with the documentation. And I'm assuming we'll have probably published some kind of form at that point. And that's when you will provide that documentation. The lender then will have, based on the rule we published, 60 days to process that forgiveness.
Okay, so I'm going to try to power through some of these, just being mindful of the time. It is 1:11, and we do want to respect everyone's time and be done by 1:30. So I'm going to just keep that in the forefront of our minds, Dan. I am a co-founder of a new ag tech startup company in Ithaca that launched shortly before COVID-19. We do not currently have a business loan or people on payroll. Are there any opportunities for us specific to SBA loans offered at present?
So that's a challenging question. You know, businesses that, you know, weren't able to establish or document payroll or income prior to February 15th, right? With respect to the PPP program, doesn't sound like that there's anything that this particular business would be able to tap into, because all of it is dependent on documented pre-February 15th numbers, right? They don't have it. For the advance, you have to be able to document that you had the EIDL, the advance. You must be able to document that you had those expenses prior to January 31st. For the EIDL loan, it is possible that you can apply for an EIDL loan to cover the business operating expenses, because if you can demonstrate that the business has been injured, then it is possible you may be able to apply. Now, you're not going to be able to go down the streamlined process because you don't have 2000, you have to rely on your projections. So I would actually, for your particular case, call the customer service number for the EIDL program. Actually, they're not accepting applications right now, so it's somewhat moot at this point until applications open up. But when they do open up again, I would suggest calling the customer service number to discuss how you would enter your application into the portal, because this is not a standard. It's not a standard situation. So I'm not sure if the portal will be able to accommodate, this particular circumstance. Beyond that, if the business has revenues or can point to some revenues, you may be eligible for conventional financing. Okay. There are some businesses that are continuing to have positive cash flow and may be eligible for conventional financing. So I should have, pointed this out before, but, we have a tremendous network of SBA funded partners throughout the country, and certainly New York State, that you can tap into for, both help with the applications for any of these programs, as well as just normal business assistance and helping you to identify what assistance you may be specifically be able to tap into that may be just unique to either your industry or your location, right? Where you are matters sometimes. Local governments and local economic development organizations are spinning up, have existing programs to help businesses, and many of them are spinning up COVID-19 specific programs. I'm certain our friends at the various chambers that are partnering for this call can also direct you to what's available in your county. For the SBA free SBA funded assistance, you can find that information, our nearest partner, whether it's the Small Business Development Center, which is funded in part by SBA, or SCORE, which is a national organization with local chapters that provides free counseling for small businesses. You can find that information on our website, www.sba.gov. It's at the top of the page. You can see the local assistance tab and literally search. Shortcut is sba.gov/local-assistance, but it's just also at the top of the page. And you can find the nearest center and the nearest SBA partner that can maybe help guide you and find something that you can tap into that if some of the things that we've discussed might not be eligible for your business. Great question.
All right. This is a question about banks. Banks must fund loans 10 calendar days from loan closing. There are several loans where the 10th day falls on a Saturday or Sunday. We still need to close on those dates. What happens if the bank does not issue the loan in 10 exact calendar days?
So we have not, it's going to sound funny. We have not issued guidance on what happens if they don't within 10 days yet. So we won't, that is, part of the, I think it's clear as I've shared throughout the program that we're publishing rules as we go here. And that's something that hasn't been published yet.
Okay. Here's one. When and how will the SBA be making 6 months of payments to cover the existing SBA loans?
So that's happening as we speak. So as I shared, we sent out the notice to the banks last night that gives them the specific processes for them to calculate those loan payments and report that information to us so that we can remit those payments to the bank on the behalf of the borrower. Borrower doesn't have to do anything though. Okay, this is something the bank has to worry about. The only thing that you as a borrower have to worry about is if your loan was in deferment. If you requested a deferment and your bank processed that deferment and you want to benefit from the payment relief, you need to contact your bank to take that loan off of deferment. That's the only action you have to take, okay? Beyond that, if you're a borrower, it isn't something you should worry about. Oh, cancel your automatic payments too and don't send the check. I mean, it is really it is that simple. If you have questions, your bank, they have all the guidance they need now. If you're a banker on this call and this guidance hasn't gotten down to you yet, well, we sent it out last night. You can reach out to our office, and we'll send it to you if you didn't get the guidance.
Great. That was a banker had actually posed that question of what do they do if they don't know. Here's one about self-employment. So if a self-employed startup single owner LLC, and they filed at a loss or a net zero last year after expenses, then are they not eligible for PPP for their own salary?
That's a great question. So if they don't have documentation to calculate that loan, then there's nothing that they can put in for the loan request. So if that's their circumstance, there currently isn't a mechanism for them to. There's no numbers to put in, I guess, right? Because you can't divide or multiply by 0.
Got it. Here's a connective question to that, Dan. Sorry to cut you off. For owners, income is eligible for funds, and they said that you said to use a Schedule C. Does the Schedule C have to be from 2019, or can it be from 2018 if they've not filed 2019 taxes yet?
So our rule said it has to be 2019, the Schedule C. So if they have not prepared their Schedule C and filed it yet, that's something that they should get on.
Okay. Connecting off of that, talking about monies spent in tax years, is there an employee count requirement that is included in the forgiveness requirements besides money spent?
Well, yes. The number of employees you keep will determine the total loan amount eligibility beyond just the payroll expenses. I guess the best way to think of it is if the only thing you're asking for PPP is payroll, then that, it's a one-to-one relationship, right? If you had non-payroll expenses in there, that's where the forgivable amount may be reduced if you don't keep 100% of your FTEs. I think that, that's the takeaway here. Still waiting on the final percentages and the final, calculation guidelines to come out, but that's what we've published.
Okay. Do marketing expenses for a car dealership qualify for forgiveness under PPP?
Marketing would not be a payroll expense or utilities, so no.
Okay.
Or mortgage interest or rent. Those are the 4, however many types of expenses that are eligible.
Just reading this question right now. Okay. This has some dates in it, so I'm gonna read it a little slow, okay? If my PPP funding comes through next week, will the entire 4/30 payroll, that's April 30th payroll, which pays my staff for the period of April 16th through April 30th, be fully usable toward the 8-week period? Or will we need to break out the portion of the payroll that is from the day of funding to the April 30th pay date?
Much like, it's a cash basis, right? So when did you incur that expense? You incurred that expense on a cash basis when you spent the money. Okay. I don't think there's nothing I've seen that would suggest that it's necessary to, accrue or prorate those funds. No, nothing, I guess nothing in the rule mentions anything about like accrual or prorating. It just says your payroll expenses over that period. So I guess if you accrue your expenses on an accrual basis, then that might be relevant. But much like with taxes, I think maybe a cash basis would be perfectly acceptable for the purposes of this program. So it shouldn't be an issue.
Awesome. We are powering through. We have enough time, I think, to take these last 3 questions that are in, and then we'll kind of close things up. If you bring all of your employees back within the 8-week period for PPP loan forgiveness, but then need to furlough them again after the 8-week period, will that impact forgiveness? Will there be an extension of funds?
Well, the only thing that matters is the 8 weeks, right? So if you're not able to keep them past that, I mean, that's not something that is relevant for the purposes of the PPP program or the loan. If the question is, will additional funds be made available? It would require additional new rules from Congress or new programming from Congress.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, sorry, I had to step away from the Q&A for a second. Are there any further guidance on what qualifies as a utility expense under the PPP? I'm guessing power, gas, and telephone count. Does our internet service count? Coal for the shop furnace, monthly subscriptions for repair information?
So no, but I think that you did kind of, the person's asking the question, I think they know the answer is that I don't think a subscription would be appropriate. That's not a utility. I don't know that our rule goes into any detail beyond that. So, internet, phone service, heating, if you're talking about your coal, that's your heating, that's a utility, right? Water, lights, electric. I think that if somebody has questions about what is typically considered, a utility expense, they can, either reach out to one of our SBA partners or talk with their, accountant, tax advisor on that subject.
Okay. And I think the last question where we'll kind of end the Q&A on, I think this person just more so wants to know your opinion, Dan. It may not be like an official stance on the SBA, but I'll read the question and you can kind of field it how you want, okay? Because I do want to honor the fact that we addressed everyone's questions. What's your response or opinion to various reports indicating that numerous large corps who have a total employee base that significantly exceeds the PPP standard were able to obtain tens of millions of dollars in loans by applying under various subsidiaries?
So I'm not actually rendering opinion. I think I made it clear that if somebody applies for and receives funds under the PPP and misrepresents their eligibility, knowingly they're committing fraud. It's a crime.
Okay. I didn't know if there was any follow-up.
I don't say about that.
I didn't know if there was any follow-up for that.
Beyond that, I cannot render opinion, but that's okay. Rules.
Well, again, there are people who try to cheat systems, unfortunately. So it's good to hear that then those people will be investigated, et cetera, et cetera. It's just like committing tax fraud. I mean, sure, there are people that do it every year and the IRS investigates that. So it's kind of in that same vein. Am I correct?
And I will say that, there is information on our website, our Inspector General, where you can report examples of, fraud and things of that nature. Okay. In fact, I think I put the scammer link that I sent out to the chambers and all that stuff takes you to our Inspector General page, and you can find more information about reporting fraud.
Awesome. I thought that was going to take you longer, so we have time for one more question. Thank you for your candidness and directness on that. Could I get self-employed UIA while our employees continue to get paid with PPP?
I can't advise on unemployment.
Awesome. And you did say that earlier, that you would not and you could not advise on unemployment. All right. You know what? We actually made it through all the questions, which is amazing. Thank you guys so much. Those were some really great questions. Thank you, Dan, for being able to answer a lot of those on the fly. You're super knowledgeable. What would you suggest as kind of like a last follow-up before I turn things over to Jennifer? If people have continued questions, because as Peter pointed out, the rules are kind of changing every day, and the SBA, you guys are doing a great job of responding to things that are coming down at the federal level. If people have continued or further questions, what would you say is the best resource to get those questions answered?
Yeah, so, he's got a point. The FAQ that's on treasury.gov's website is literally getting updated on almost a daily basis, right? I think that those are the two sources that folks should be looking at for, if they have a question. if what they were referring to in terms of FAQs or guidance that is sent out, doesn't apply to their situation, go to those resources first. Check our website, check Treasury's website, see if the FAQ has been updated, and maybe your question has been answered at that point. You can certainly reach out to our SBA funded partners, or contact our office. If you have questions about frankly any of this stuff, you can reach us at 315-471-9393, or on our website, sba.gov, local assistance.
Can you say that phone number again, Dan?
315-471-9393.
Okay.
And we can definitely do our best to clarify to the extent we can, and if the new rules come out, if you we'll continue to publish them through our partners too, through folks like the chamber. What I can't do, and I hope I made that clear, I can't pull up a loan, a PPP loan. We don't have that ability. If you're not sure where your status is for the PPP loan, you need to work with your bank to identify exactly where it is. And for that matter, same with the EIDL. We don't have the ability to pull up individual loans. So, I think we kind of described what the process is right now for that. And then of course we're waiting for Congress for updates on funding and opening these programs back up. So that's all I've got, Dave.
You provided a lot. Thank you so much. We are going to go ahead and wrap up. It is 1:30. We want to respect everyone's time. Again, a huge thank you to Dan Rickman. Dan, again, is the Deputy District Director of the SBA. A huge shout out to Canandaigua, Watkins Glen, and the Seneca County Chambers and their members for joining us today. As many of you had asked, the webinar will be made available on the Tompkins Chamber website if everything goes well this afternoon. If not, it'll be available on Monday. And Dan, a few people had asked, would you be available to share the slides that you posted today for people to be able to access those, and maybe I can get them up on the Chamber's website?
So I will say in the normal circumstances, I'd be okay with that. But to Peter's comment about how the rules are changing, I think we need to stick to what's on the website and the FAQs, which is where this information is being pulled from anyway. So
Awesome.
I'm updating this stuff as we go, and I'm updating it almost daily. So I'm not comfortable with putting something out there that
Would be outdated.
It'll just be outdated, Monday, potentially. So sorry, guys.
Okay, but again, if you missed something or want to see what was the most current for today, the slides will be available via the webinar, which will be shareable. But I would just then reiterate to Dan's point of consistently checking the SBA website for updates and the latest news and resources. All right, and that will conclude our webinar today. Thank you all again for joining us. We truly appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your questions. Dan, thank you again for making yourself available. And we hope everyone stays healthy and safe and has a great weekend.
Thanks, guys.
All right, thank you all.
Bye.